Welcome to the Raw Vibe Podcast. If this is your first time stopping by, thank you very much. My name is Chuck Tuck, and I'm the host. I know there's a lot of different podcasts that you could be watching or listening to, so again, thanks. Today, I have a guest who's a 30-year law enforcement veteran. We're going to talk about some things from his book called Mastering the Impairment Code. So let me ask you, if somebody was drunk, high, whether it be on coke, pot, whatever it might be, could you tell if they were? If they were, would you give them a second chance if they messed up? These are some of the things that we're going to talk about from his book. So please sit back, relax, enjoy, and remember to like, share, and follow. It really does help. I'd also like to ask you and remind you that if you are a pet owner, please be responsible and have your pets spayed or neutered. All right, let's get right into it.
As you said, my name is Chuck Marting, and I love your name too, by the way. And I am a retired law enforcement officer of a little under 20 years. And during that time, I was what was classified as a drug recognition expert. So I was a DUI officer, drug recognition expert. So I'm an expert witness in court in explaining to a judge and jury and to others what signs of impairment an officer or somebody would have observed to conclude that somebody was impaired. And I took a lot of that to get to where I'm at right now. It was something I really did well. I taught in our police academy. I taught in the Citizens Academy. I did a lot of community presentations, things like that, just on recognizing and identifying drug impairment. 11 of the years as a police officer I spent in the schools as a school resource officer. So I dealt with kids and parents and helping them identify these things too. I had a DUI arrest one night, and the individual was really upset that they were going to miss their pre-employment drug test. And I looked at him and I go, well, why don't you just get a mobile service or something? He goes, well, nobody does that. I'm like, really? So I started looking at it, and nobody in my area was doing this. And so I recruited my wife because, she'd already put up with 20 years of me being a police officer. And it's hard on your family because, she kisses me goodbye every night, not knowing if I'm going to come home in the morning,
Right.
And so she was all game to try and find something. And it got to the point where my wife was making more money in 2 hours than I was all day as a police officer. And I said, I think it's time to leave. So we grew our business. We do drug and alcohol testing and safety implementation, things like that for businesses. And we've done that for the last 14 years. So a little over 30 years of experience in doing this. And I took what I'd learned from that and brought it into the workplace because, Chuck, what was happening was I was having supervisors, when I would go and test somebody, that would just look at me and they go, so what does this mean? What is this person impaired? What's going on? And so I found the opportunity to take what I had learned and what I was already teaching and implement it into the workplace, because what I found was a lot of supervisors, they get promoted. You were a great employee. You did really well. You're going to be an awesome supervisor. And then they say, you're in charge of the drug and alcohol program and things. And they give them the book and they go, God bless you. And that's the extent of their training. And so they really don't know. And so that's where that came about, was implementing all the things that I've learned and then bringing it into the workplace, because I think it's an area that we're sorely missing right now. And I know that you've seen it where we've started legalizing a lot of these substances, things like that. And employers have been the main thing that have been left out of this conversation. They basically been said, you know what, deal with it, do what you need to do. And I'm finding a lot of employers that are being bullied by their own employees in the workplace, where they come up to them and say, you know what, it's legal and there's nothing you can do about it.
I also wonder about this because of the fact that, like I said, you need to be an expert as possible in recognizing some of these things visually or other cues, because you can't go around urine test right now every single minute of the day. So you're going to have to be able to see some of these visual cues. And I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, is the important part is to not misdiagnose the cues, if that makes any sense.
You're exactly right, Chuck. I have a chapter in my book specifically that covers things like that. That's medical conditions. We have people that are diabetic, epileptic, have seizures, things like that. And when you come across those individuals, if you don't know they have those conditions, it can mimic the signs and symptoms of drug impairment. And a lot of times it gets misdiagnosed. But there are things that I talk about that you can do that will help you in identifying, yeah, this is a medical issue and not a drug impairment issue. And so I think that's a very important point that you bring up because it happens all the time.
Or is there one or two stories that could tell us whether this has happened that you know of, or that you've experienced firsthand as far as these encounters of impairment where it possibly went undetected or misdetected?
Yeah. There's a lot of stories that I can tell you, but I know, the most common one was I would get called, and I was just called by an employer just 2 weeks ago where they brought me in and they said, you know what, there's something going on with this person. They're not communicating their thought process and how they're doing things. It's just, they're reacting slow to things. You know, it just didn't seem right. And the supervisor just couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt he had enough to do a drug and alcohol test to make sure to eliminate that was the issue. And I came in and I started talking to the person, and just based on 30 seconds of talking to this person, I asked him, I said, are you diabetic? And the person said, yeah, I am. And I said, when's the last time you took your medication? And he couldn't give me an answer. And so I looked at the supervisor and said, let's get paramedics in here to check him out. And when they got there, his blood sugar levels were really, really low. And so that's what was causing this appearance that he had of being impaired with alcohol. And sometimes you get the smell of what, it's the acid and things like that come in their breath that was being detected. And so it was mistakenly thought that it was alcohol. And when the paramedics got there, they gave him some glucose and his levels came up, and all of a sudden, totally different person, the person he usually sees. So,
Yeah.
The supervisor, look, he made a decision. He didn't do anything wrong. He did the right thing because he was able to identify there's an issue going on here. And had he just ignored it or dismissed it, it could have been a medical crisis right there in their place of work.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about, that smell on the breath, the sweetness, like ketones or something like that.
Ketones, yes.
So you're absolutely right in this situation where the supervisor did not jump to a conclusion, but they probably should have done what you did, probe a little bit more and ask a couple more questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that this is beneficial, your information for these employers or whoever it might be, to understand how to ask questions.
Yeah, it is. And you have to have, there's a couple things that come with that. One, you have to have very good active listening skills. And you have to allow people to answer those questions. And sometimes when we get in a hurry, what I've found is people will sit there and go, they'll answer the question, or the person's trying to formulate the words, but we jump in and try to give it to them, and we miss a lot of things by doing that. An example of that is an individual that we tested just the other day in the workplace said, well, the last time I drank was last night. There's no way that my alcohol levels should be that high. I'm just having conversation, and I said, well, what'd you do today? And they started talking about their day and the things that they did. And unintentionally, with them, they said, well, when I was at lunch, I had a hamburger, I had a Bud Light, and I had, what did he just tell me? Didn't even realize it. But had I cut him off as he was explaining this to me, we would have never found that out. Because the last thing he said, well, I drank last night. Well, you forgot about what you ate at lunch, but you just told me. And that's how drugs and alcohol affect our mind and our ability to communicate and to talk and to find resolution and answers and things like that. Those are the things, it's patience. I teach my team also empathy. All of this that I'm doing is doing it with empathy. I found a long time ago, Chuck, that zero tolerance doesn't work. It's punitive. It's punishing. It's after the fact. And what I try to teach people is what I call zero blind spots, trying to identify these things before it gets to a crisis, before it ends up becoming the front page of the news. You know,
Mm,
as easy as having just a 30-second check in with somebody, your kid, a family member, anybody that you're suspecting this with, just 30 seconds talking to them, asking them a couple questions, you're going to know. Because you got to figure a lot of your employers, parents, everybody else, especially your employers and your leaders, they know what's normal for Dave to come to work and what's out of character for him. They're going to
yeah.
recognize it faster than anybody else. In fact, I've even had families call their employer and say, "Hey, what's going on with him? You know, I'm seeing this and this when he comes home. I don't know. Do you guys know what's going on with him?" So it's ended up becoming a team effort with the family and the employer trying to identify what's going on with this individual. Um, but a lot of times they're the first ones to know.
And, with this situation, it's right off the bat, we mentioned the culture of accountability in the workplace. Now, with the pandemic, and of course it's over, I think, right?
I hope so. Yeah, it's crazy. It's changed us all for forever though.
It has. And my question on this is there's still a lot of remote workers. How would you tell or recognize a remote employee that might be impaired by some sort of substance? Is that a different situation?
No, it's a very good point that you make because, again, just like we're on a camera right now, if I was your employee, you would know how we would normally act. You know, am I very upset? Am I aggravated? Out of character for me to act? Yeah, exactly. Um, and to kind of give you another story with Uncle Chuck here. I had a person that called me and goes, "Hey, can we go and drug test this person at their home because they're remote, and I know they were smoking weed." And I said, "Well, what was going on?" And he was in Zoom with the Brady Bunch thing going on, and he looks up to talk to everybody, and people are all laughing, and it kind of set him back. He's like, "Did I say something? Is there something I did?" But then as he's looking, he sees there's only one person that's not laughing, and when he looks, the person has a bong sitting behind him smoking. The guy was toking marijuana during their meeting, and everybody was laughing because this guy is just sitting there oblivious that his bong is sitting behind him. But my point in sharing that with you is that we did have people that were drinking alcohol, that were participating in other things, prescription drug abuse, things like that, because they were trying to deal with the crisis that we were in at that time. And so people were isolated. You had people that were in recovery that were going to their therapies that all of a sudden they couldn't go anymore. So now what are they doing? Well, the only thing that was really legal during that time were if you could get your prescriptions, alcohol, you still had access to it, and you still had access to marijuana. And so people were self medicating. Then, when what we've seen is there's some people that are still in those situations where they can work from home, but then we have other people that are now coming back into the workplace, and we're discovering that they have addiction issues now that
Hmm.
are being recognized. And so we're having to deal with that, which is, most of your employers have the ability to deal with that, and they have programs to help with that.
Talking about that stuff, alcohol, as long as you're over 21 or 18 or wherever in different states, I don't know how it's changed, but it's legal, but this is the wrong word to use, but inherently know that it's you should not drink during work hours. But with marijuana, CBD, even though it's really doesn't have the THC, although some or a lot have a slight level of THC, I think we end up making an excuse of, like I said, we are self-medicating, saying it's okay. Well, it's legal, so I should be able to because I'm dealing with stress. How does an employer and how does the individual work with that?
Well, man, that is such a good question. You're awesome at bringing this stuff out. Um, you know, again, it's identifying and knowing the individuals that you're dealing with, but
Mhm.
this stuff is being introduced into the workplace, and a lot of it is misconception by employees. Okay, what is the one thing, and I'm sure that you've probably heard it too, what is the one thing that people do when you compare marijuana and alcohol? Well, they tell people it's safer than alcohol. Okay, but what I end up having to tell employers, and what I tell these people when I come in contact with them, is it may be, but it's not less impairing. Okay,
Right.
just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's safe. And that's the disconnect that we're getting, is that people hear that and they figure, well, it's safer than alcohol. That must mean that I can do this. I can get in my car. I can drive a company vehicle. I can do all these things, and I'll be just fine because it's safer. You know, we have CBD and we have these things in the stores now, even at truck stops. Okay, your
Mhm.
truck drivers, it is a banned substance for them to have, but it's legal to purchase, and so we have it at the cash register. Well, what do these guys do? It talks about it relieves muscle pain, things like this, and so those guys see it and they're like, well, they're selling it here, it must be all right, and they take it, and then they get drug tested and they fail their drug test, and now they just are on the edge of losing their career because they took something thinking it was okay. Um, the problem is that CBD, um, anything that's less than 3% THC levels is CBD. Anything above that is then classified as marijuana. Um, the problem with this is there's no approved extraction method. So everybody
Mhm.
has a different extraction method of doing it. You'll find that the inserts, where I've had people that have taken CBD, 100% THC free is what it says. But then when I have them bring in the insert, in the very bottom, very small letters, it says may have trace amounts of THC. Just like
Yeah.
decaffeinated coffee. Decaffeinated coffee still has trace amounts of caffeine. What does THC do in the body? It accumulates. So over a period of time, when they take their drug tests, they're never impaired. There's not enough THC and CBD to get you impaired. But over time, it builds up in your system. So when you take a drug test, it comes back positive, because we're not testing for cannabidiol. We're testing for THC. And so then the people go, I don't do marijuana. I only do CBD. Well, CBD is part of marijuana, and they didn't get all this out. And this is what's happened.
And
Um,
I would imagine too, Chuck, that that goes for the topical stuff too, right? Not just an ingestible.
yeah, it is transdermal, CBD is. So even the lotions and things like that, I've walked through workplaces and have pointed that out, saying, it's not going to get them high, but they will come back on a drug test. So, understand when I'm talking about a drug test, Chuck, a drug test is not an impairment test. It's only testing for the presence of. And so you have policies and procedures, and they have that in there that, you know, for lack of better words, like I just talked about earlier, zero tolerance. We're not allowing these substances. And so when they do that, well, the lab isn't able to tell you, was it CBD or was it marijuana? Because we're only testing for marijuana. So we don't know if it's because of that lotion. We're assuming it may be because that's what they're saying they're using, but we can't prove it. So that's part of the problem. Um, and we have people that are now coming into work with the edibles that are infused with CBD and things like that. I Before we came on the air here, I had just read a story in the news today that Circle K it's a convenience store. In
Mhm.
2026, they're rolling out CBD infused drinks. Okay.
Well, well, they're all over the place right now.
Yeah. So how are you as a leader or an employer going to monitor that coming into your workplace? Are you going to check everybody's bottle, everybody's canister, because everybody has those the Yeti cups that keep everything cold or hot? Are we going to go around sniffing those to make sure that are looking at them to see if, it turns your job into, as a supervisor, a nightmare because you don't know what people are bringing in. So
Yeah.
we're doing this, and it's against. it's against the FDA or the Food and Drug Administration. Their whole rules on this is that you're not supposed to put it in drinks. You're not supposed to put it in food, just for that same reason. But they're doing it anyway, and it's just not being enforced.
Well, I would also imagine now that depending on where you're at, we've got the psychedelics, the mushrooms, the microdosing, and all that that's happening. And I would imagine that pretty soon that's really going to be legalized. And that's just going to put that much more of a um, roadblock or something on the employers. Or again, like you said at the beginning, not necessarily out at a workplace. It could be your child. It could be it could be anywhere.
Chuck, I'm in Colorado, and I will always have a business here because we love our drugs here. We were the first ones to legalize marijuana. First
Mountain
ones,
High.
first one, yeah, exactly. We're first ones to legalize psychedelics, and I've already had employers that have been affected by this because, again, people think it's safe. They're being treated for a medical condition. Well, the wording that they're doing now with psychedelics, the education is the big part that's missing from this. Psychedelics, like any other drugs that we have, for some reason, scientists and doctors and everybody else have not understood why this happens. But from first time use with these type of substances, you can have what they call flashbacks for the rest of your life that they don't know what triggers them. They don't know what happens, but it's like having that whole experience all over again that you had the first time you took that substance. Um, but we also have, in the way that these laws are being written, for example, here in Colorado, if you're my psychiatrist and you've go ahead and diagnose me that I can have psychedelics, so psilocybin mushrooms, for example, okay? If I don't like how you're giving me my therapy, or I think that you haven't given me enough in my microdosing, in our law here, I can now become my own care provider. I can grow in a 12 by 12 box my medicine. Not only that, but I can also sell it to other people that are needing it. So now I've become a legalized, provider for somebody. Not only that, but we have been, in our law, it's been mandated. And why it's important for you to understand this is because people are taking our model and they're adapting it because it's already in force here. So let's do it in Washington or wherever.
Mhm.
We have to have safe centers in every um, county available to these individuals where I can come in there. You're working in that facility. I take my medicine or my psilocybin or ecstasy or ketamine or any of those psychedelics, and they evaluate me. They watch me to make sure I don't have any adverse reactions. But then when they're done with that, they say, "Okay, you're good to go," and now I can leave. Now I can go to work. Well, what we've had happen 3 months ago is I had an employer that couldn't find one of their employees for over 2 hours. They finally found this guy under a conveyor belt, curled up fetally and crying. And they asked him what's going on. He felt somebody was trying to kill him that was running through the workplace. So they bring him in to do an evaluation or drug evaluation with me to do his drug testing. And I'm talking to him, I'm filling out my paperwork, and he's talking. And I look up Chuck, and he's talking to somebody behind me, but there's nobody behind me. And he's having a full blown conversation with them. And so I asked him, I said, "Are you microdosing?" He said, "Yeah, I am. How'd you know about that?" "Well, I know a thing or two about these things."
Well, yeah, it's hallucinogenic. It's
How
we've heard stories about this stuff in the '60s, right? And we make it a whole different thing. It was different then.
Well,
Eh,
Chuck, even with marijuana, none of us would know who Cheech and Chong were if it wasn't for the escapades they had with marijuana. Okay, we know it's
right.
impairing. We know that, you know. And look, I am not against medical intervention with this. Okay, that's not my dog in the fight. If it works and it does the things that they tell you it does, and you medically feel that you need it, then God bless you. I hope it works. My thing is I don't want you getting in your car because you feel like you're okay and get in an accident that seriously changes the course of your life, but also affects somebody else's. Or you go into the workplace thinking you're okay, and now we have an issue. That's the part that we're missing.
Hmm.
isn't so much nobody, including myself, want to see people in pain or in need of substances that are going to help them deal with whatever they're dealing with. I mean, my father passed away a couple years ago because of Parkinson's. And I can honestly tell you that if my dad would have come to me and said, son, I want to go and try medical marijuana, I want to see if it gives me some relief. Chuck, I would have gone to the dispensary and bought it for him. Okay.
I'm glad you're saying this because in my gut, I wanted to ask you this, but I did not want to put you in the position of saying yes, you're for it or against it. But you are for it for the right purpose of medication, medical purposes, which is different from saying I'm using it for recreational and hey,
Exactly.
party on.
Yeah, I just want, if you're going to do this, we need to do it responsibly. We need to have people that are being able to diagnose this to see if these things actually do what people are being told they do. Because right now, there's medically and everything else, there's not a lot of paperwork or studies that are showing that, yeah, it does this or this. What we have
Hmm.
is word of mouth, third parties. I got into a conversation with a newspaper here in Colorado that put out an article that said that marijuana has been shown to cure cancer. And so I contacted them. I said, "Do you have that documentation? Because I teach this all the time. I want to be able to show that to people." And then they came back and they called me and said, "Yeah, we're going to have to do an extraction or a piece in the paper that was misquoted." Because that was what this person had been told by somebody else, who was told this by somebody else, but no hard documentation of that. And it wasn't that I was trying to get them in trouble, but look, if you have something that proves that it does this, then let's put it out to people. Let's help them because that's what they're looking for, But the problem that we have, especially in just jumping back at marijuana real quick, when I was a police officer, I was actually enforcing driving under the influence of drugs with marijuana before it even became medically or recreationally legal in Colorado. Okay, what we're seeing is that um, the THC levels when I was a police officer, you're talking 8 to 10%. Right now, smokable marijuana in Colorado and nationally has been showing 80 to 90% THC levels. Your edibles, your vapes, your shatter, your waxes, your tinctures, your lotions are shown to be at 100% THC levels. Levels that we've never seen. Hydroponic, these guys have been able to perfect this stuff. And
Yeah.
so now it reacts totally different than anything else we've ever seen before.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, yeah. If you're 50 years old and you used to do that, or 60 years old, it's different from when your buddies are growing something or you buy something at 7, 8, 9% THC,
Yeah, it's
maybe 15 at the most compared to now.
yeah,
Eight.
and then they're mixing stuff with it. The big thing that we're
Yeah.
having an issue with right now nationally, and I just read about this morning, is another case where we're now finding it having been mixed with fentanyl, and so people are taking this. We have a mother that just has reached out to her community to talk about her daughter passing away, who innocently was smoking marijuana that had been laced with fentanyl, and she didn't know, and she died. You know, this is the stuff that we're running into. A lot of the college kids, things like that, they get this stuff, and the reason, having experience in this, Chuck, is the reason why we're finding that is the people that are selling this stuff to these individuals. They're introducing that drug because their marijuana is going to react totally different than anything you've had before. And if you
Yeah.
like it, you're going to go back to them because of what you experienced. Now they got you addicted or going down the road of having to use another substance when they can tell you then, hey, well, we have fentanyl in this, and see, you didn't die or anything, so it's not going to hurt you. So you know you're taking it. Well, then these people end up taking just straight fentanyl with it, and they pass away because they overdose with it
Yeah.
because they had one
I,
experience where it was okay. Now it's not.
I'm not against uh, any of this, whether it be recreational or for medical use, but there is a time and a place. But also, I want to say, this is just my personal feeling. If you must, and if you're going to know where it's coming from, know who you're getting it from, because if you don't, like you said, you don't know if it's laced with fentanyl and how much, and it only takes a little dusting, and you're done.
Yeah, yeah, and we've seen that. It's in the news all the time. So
Yeah.
how are you as a parent, as a leader, as a person in the community, how are you supposed to deal with this? Well, I honestly, that's why I wrote the book, is that you have to start somewhere and understanding what these substances do. It may be the only opportunity that you have to identify that somebody is taking something or showing signs of taking something because you recognize it. How many
Yeah.
times have you had people that you may have talked to, or even yourself, where you're gone in and you're like, there's something going on with this person. I don't know what it is, but there's something going on. Where if you were told, bloodshot eyes, slurred speech, inability to comprehend, delayed reaction time, things like that, that are all conducive to drug use, you wouldn't know.
I want to remind everybody once again that your book is called Mastering the Impairment Code: Leadership Strategies to Recognize, Respond to, and Resolve Drug Use in the Workplace. But this is not just about the workplace. Leadership, like I said, it could be a parent, it could be a teacher, a counselor, anyone like that.
You bet. You bet. And that's exactly it. We're all leaders. We all are. And it's just not the workplace, but I can tell you that the why I titled that way is because the workplace is the one place that we're not addressing it, where these individuals have no idea what they're dealing with. You know, um, the one thing you need to look at, and I don't know if you know this, Chuck, but we're talking about the rescheduling of marijuana. All right, it's
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
it's gonna happen. All right, I don't know when it's gonna happen. There's too many factors involved. A lot of it monetarily. There's a lot of people that want to dip their hands into that. Okay, my issue is that if they reschedule it to a Schedule 3, is which what they're talking about right now, unless they have a safety carve out in there, it's going to be your truck drivers, your pilots, all these people that are in safety sensitive positions are now going to be able to use it because it is for DOT because it's been reclassified. We're not going to test for it.
I got to throw in there that goes for flaggers too.
Yes, yes,
They control that traffic. They're an air traffic controller on ground. Very important.
yeah. So that's something, but we'll still be able to test for it under reasonable suspicion. So if you came in, you had that 30-second interview with somebody and you saw some things, you can get them tested, okay, because you have reason to believe that they're impaired. Or if they get into a post-accident, they end up getting into a wreck with a company car. They did something at the plant that caused a monetary loss of product. They can get that tested to see if that is what contributed to that accident. So
Okay.
I think it's important for people to understand. Look, we know that it's going to happen, all right, but we have to have some common sense in this. Look, if they don't have that safety carve out in it, Chuck, I'm not getting on a plane. All right, I don't know if the pilot just hit the bong before he goes in, or he had his edible, or he smoked a vape. Okay, we've already had some incidents with that with psilocybin, where we had a pilot in a plane that took some, got on the plane, was going home, and then tried to take over the aircraft and was trying to crash it. Okay,
I
so
remember
we
that.
we know that if we don't address this, if people don't have it, right now with DOT, just to give you an idea, this is just, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but DOT, we are not testing for fentanyl. Your truck drivers, your pilots, they're not being tested for fentanyl. It hasn't been added to the panel. We're testing for opioids. We're testing for heroin and Percocet and oxycodone, oxycontin, things like that. But they haven't. They just HSS or Human Resource. They've just now added that they're wanting to add that to the panel. Okay. Well, with the
Wow.
government, it's later than sooner before you finally get it in. So I don't know when it's going to be coming. Now they've approved it. Now it's the labs and everybody working together saying, okay, we can start testing for it. So who
Yeah.
knows how long? But these guys know that. They know they're not being tested for it. You know, so it's that thing of getting around it, finding a way to get around all these things and take things that are going to give you the reaction that you're wanting.
Hmm. Um, Chuck, I think we kind of touched on this early on, and I'm not sure if I'm going to phrase this correctly, but uh, is there still a misconception, or what are the misconceptions that employers have uh, when it comes to this? When it comes to drugs, whether it be the alcohol, marijuana, or CBD, or microdosing, psilocybin, what are the misconceptions?
I think the biggest misconception that you're going to find, Chuck, is that people feel because they're being told this by their employees or hearing this in the news that there's nothing they can do about it. If
Mm.
people take these, they take them, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And that is not the case. Okay. Colorado, we've had legalized marijuana for over 20 years now. Okay. I have employers that still don't have drug testing policies, that still don't know if they can test for it. I've had employers come up to me and say, well, it's legal. I don't know if it's even worth my time testing for it. And what I've told them is, what are we pretending not to know? Would you rather, just because somebody tests positive, if they're not a DOT position, if they test positive for marijuana, it doesn't mean you can't offer them the job. It doesn't mean that you can't hire them. What it means, Chuck, is that I have to sit down and explain to you what our policies are. Under these
Mm.
circumstances, if you test positive, it could affect your employment. Are you willing, knowing what our policies are, to come and work for us, knowing that if you continue to do this, that this could happen? Okay, and if they do that, then great. Or having a second chance policy. Look, people are going to mess up. I had a guy that, he's worked for a company for 38 years, and he tested positive for marijuana, and everybody was shocked, including him. And I start talking to him, and he said, look, he goes, I was at a party with my family, and somebody brought something, and he said, I got caught up in the moment. I'm like, well, hell, it's legal. So he took it. Well, he didn't know he's going to be drug tested on Monday when he got back to work. And the other misconception is when you take first time use, it's going to be in your system forever. And that's not the case. And I told his employer, if he's only had it one time, within 5 days, it's going to be out of his system. So they said, okay, let's test you next week. And we brought him back in, and he tested and he was negative. It was just situational. It was there, and people are trying to figure out what's the big deal, and before they knew they'd get in trouble. So now we have people that they're wanting to see what the big deal is. And so they try it,
Mhm.
and then they can get in trouble. But if we have those zero blind spots, instead of just enforcing, zero tolerance, if we show empathy to an employee and we show them that we care and that we want them there, and we have a plan, such as a second chance policy. We have employers that have what's called an EAP, or an employee assistance program. They can have them go see that person, talk to them if they have an issue with it, and help them get the help that they need, and then go back to work. So there's
Yeah.
so many different things that we can do. It doesn't have to be punitive. It doesn't have to be, finalized, me driving the nail into and hitting it with the hammer. You know, we have to show people empathy. We have to show them that we care about them and that we want them there. But at the same time, we can't have employees bullying their employers and threatening them and all this other stuff. We have to give these guys the tools that they need. We need to give parents the tools they need. They have no idea what's out there. You were talking about vapes earlier. I had an employer yesterday that called me out to come and test a flagger. Okay. And as he's doing this with this guy, he's vaping, right? When I get there, one of the things we do is have them empty their pockets. When he took his vape out, I looked on the side of it and it said that it's THC. So he
Mm.
was vaping marijuana right there talking to his employer, and his employer had no clue. None. So we've got to educate employers. We got to educate these individuals for what to look for, and then how do you handle it? You're fired, you're out of here? No, we need to have conversations with people. We have to have education. I also teach employees because a lot of them are scared of being the snitch or whatever. They don't want to have this person get mad at them. We have to come up with ways of helping them. So I've gone through and I've taught employees how to recognize impairment because they're working with this person. They want to go home to their families at the end of the day too. So if they
Yeah.
know what to look for and they come to you as a supervisor, just say, Chuck, I don't know, there's something going on with Allison right now. She's just not making sense. I'm having to do her work because she can't remember how to do it. And she's been here for 20 years. Okay. She's just giving you, that employee just gave you the information you need as a supervisor to now go and have that 30-second check in with somebody and see if you see those things. Okay. Now let's address it. Let's go ahead and get them tested. Let's see what's going on. And I think that is the best way to handle this. I
Yeah.
don't want to see people lose their livelihood, and it doesn't have to be that way. It's just this the way we've always done it, and we've got to change this.
The way you're saying and explain everything is 100% the way that I agree that it should be. Um, the EAPs, the second opportunities, these subtle hints that you drop to your supervisor who could check directly with their subordinate.
Yeah,
You
team
know,
member.
it,
You know.
yeah, team member, much better word to use. But it is. And I also would think that there's a lot of extenuating circumstances that we as individuals give ourselves to do some of these things because we think it's going to benefit us. I think it kind of like what you're saying at the very beginning. We are self-medicating, but there could be an issue that's deeper, and the reason behind why we're doing that.
Yeah, communication is key. You know,
Hmm.
I another situation to tell you about, Chuck, is I had a individual that went in and look, I can't sit there and tell an employer, yeah, this person is not impaired or whatever. But I with this guy, I didn't see any signs of impairment that would indicate to me that anything was going on. I told the employer, I said, you need to have a conversation with this guy. He's not taking drugs. I can see that. I can tell you right now, his test is going to come back negative when he gets back from the lab. But there's something else going on that you just need to have a conversation with him. Well, this guy was having a daughter that was getting married. He doesn't have the money for this. He's stressing. So what does that do? It carries over into his work. He's absent-minded. He misses something. He gets into a post-accident, things like that, because he's got all these different things on his mind. Well, what he didn't understand, what a lot of people didn't know, is his employer had what's called an employee assistance program, and it's just not for drugs and alcohol. They sent him to them. And guess what that program did, Chuck? They helped him and his family plan out his wife or his daughter's wedding. They gave him the resources. They did all this stuff. They didn't do it for him, but they helped him coordinate it. And not only that, but this guy, when he came back to work, guess what? He was a lot better. He was able to
Yeah.
do his job. He was focused because he had the help that he needed. But if that situation hadn't happened, his employer would have never known. They would have thought, well, he's on drugs or he's having a mental issue or something like that. No, you just needed to talk to him and allow him to express what's going on and then key in on that. Because look, every employer, large company is paying for an EAP. They pay for it every month. And it's a program that is very rarely used because we think it's got to be for somebody that has an addiction issue or something. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It could be that one person that took or smoked weed or they did something because they were trying to get relief because of whatever the situation may be. And now I can get somebody to talk to them, and then we can figure out, okay, let's come up with a game plan so it doesn't affect your work, so you don't lose your job. That's that second chance policy type of thing that we're talking about that makes sense.
Hmm.
Especially if you got a good employee. You don't want to lose them because they made a mistake. If we can
Yeah.
fix it, let's fix it.
The other thing too is, like you're saying, being able to recognize these things and to bring the right action to it. Because you mentioned stress. Stress also causes an imbalance, a chemical imbalance, just like
Yeah,
substances do. So it might be difficult to recognize. So you need to ask and talk.
yeah. But we can't be afraid to go and ask or
Right.
afraid to talk. And that's one of the things that I teach with this book when I go in and do training for supervisors is how to talk to your employees. you know, showing empathy. And what I've told a lot of them is, look, showing empathy is going to solve a lot of things. It's why I didn't get into a lot of fights when I was a cop. It's why I was able to solve a lot of cases and stuff, because I showed empathy to somebody. If you show somebody that you care, totally different reaction in how they talk and they treat you, and you might be able
Yeah.
to get something done. But if we don't have empathy, and if we don't say you don't think you have empathy for some, well, pretend that you do. Pretend that you care and see what happens.
Yeah.
I've taught that to my guys. I get what we call synthetic urine from people. Okay. They come in, they know it's against the policies. I've been teaching this for 30 years on adulterated specimens and stuff like that. And I get it from people and they hand it to me after I talk to them. And people go, well, how'd you do that? Well, you have the misconception, well, they're going to get mad if I go and I address it. They're going to want to fight me. They're going to get violent. It's in how you talk to people. So if I come up to you, Chuck, and I say, hey, I'm looking at your specimen and there's something here I need to ask you a question about it. Is there something that you're worried about? And then you say, nah, Chuck, that's my pee, or whatever the case may be. And then I look at it and they go, well, why are you asking? I'm like, well, there's no temperature on here. There's a totally different color to this. It doesn't look like a normal specimen. And usually when somebody gives me an adulterated specimen, it's because they're worried about marijuana or something like that. So what is it that you're worried about? And then they'll tell me, it's weed, or it's this or that. And then I let them talk. And I say, hey,
Yeah.
let's go talk to your employer. Give me what you brought into the restroom. And then they hand it to me. So then when I come to you as an employee or employer and I go, hey, you need to talk to John. This is what he gave me because he's concerned about losing his job. And so this is what he did. And then you can deal with it. If you fire them for violating your policy, then that's what you choose to do. But now we're having to address this. And that's the best way of doing it. But it's through communication and showing empathy and showing people that you care and that you're not just trying to fire them. Because what's one of the things that an employee is going to think now they got caught? I'm going to lose my
I'm
job.
fine.
I'm going to get
Yep.
fired. I'm screwed now. And that's not the case. I've had people get mad at me and say, because of you, I'm going to lose my job. And I tell them, I say, well, look, I didn't hire you and I didn't fire you. So you're talking to the wrong cat. You need to talk to somebody else over here. And, we have so much lack of communication, it's not even funny. Because we're scared of offending somebody, scared of what their reaction is going to be. Well, you're going through all these scenarios in your mind and you haven't even tried it yet.
It's, and we all do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's- My first thought is, Chuck, you got an opening? I'm coming and working for you right now.
Well, exactly. But see, think about it for just a second. And it's a really good point that you're making. Because if your employees feel like that, what are they going to tell their friends that are looking for a job?
Mm,
Hey, come over here.
this is the best place. Guy is really cool.
Yeah, it's a benefit because now your employees are bringing good people in for you too. It's a
Yeah.
win-win.
Chuck, I've said it a couple of times, but I would like for you to mention your website, how people can get a hold of you, where they could get the book, all that stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that opportunity. I really appreciate it. They can get a hold of me on chuckmarting.com is my website. I do speaking, training, consulting, and then it also talks about the book. If you want to go to the book specifically, you can go to masteringtheimpairmentcode.com. You can order it there. It's available anywhere right now, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. In fact, if you go to Amazon, you can get the digital or the Kindle version right now for free. So
Wow.
I put that out there because my thing right now is I'm just trying to get this out, trying to get this out to people because it's gonna change the way you do things, to change the way you look at things, and you're gonna start recognizing things that, or even come up to me like some people have and said, you know what, I saw that before, I didn't know what it is, but I know what it is now. Thank you.
Well, this first I'll call it, this issue is only going to get bigger, and this resolve or resolution is only going to continue to grow. So, a book such as this, I think, is an important guide, an important reference. And I got to say, Chuck, thank you very much. Chuck Martin, thank you.
Thank you. Well, and I got to tell you, Chuck, I've got to give a shout out to you and thank you for what you do. It's very needed in our society today. Just not with the topic that I'm talking about, but I've listened to your podcast and all the different people that you bring in, all the different podcasts that you do. You're doing important work and you're getting things out to people in a timely manner in the way that they need to have it, and figuring out how to address these things. And if it wasn't because of the work that you're doing, some of these things may never have come to light. So I want to thank you for doing that and for continuing to do that, and to show people that you care and that you're wanting to be the difference in their life. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Chuck. Thanks.